Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the story of one of the most important airplanes ever built at the Douglas DC-3. Known as the plane that truly changed the world, the DC-3 wasn't just another aircraft, it was a revolution in aviation. From its first flight in 1935 to its service in World War II, and even to this day where some still fly in remote corners of the world, the DC-3 has earned a place as a living legend of the skies. Early context: in the early 1930s, commercial aviation was still finding its wings. Air travel was uncomfortable, slow, and often required multiple stops. Most airliners were noisy, cramped, and uneconomical. Airlines struggled to attract paying passengers, and the idea of long-distance, reliable air travel was more dream than reality. Enter the Douglas Aircraft Company. Led by visionary designer Donald Douglas, the company set out to create a passenger plane that would change all of that. The result was the DC-3, short for Douglas Commercial 3. First flight and design: the DC-3 made its maiden flight on December 17, 1935, exactly 32 years to the day after the Wright brothers' first flight. That symbolism wasn't lost on the aviation community. Here was an aircraft that seemed to leap decades ahead of its competitors. What made the DC-3 so remarkable? First, its design. It was an all-metal, low-wing monoplane, with retractable landing gear and two powerful radial piston engines. The plane could carry 21 passengers comfortably, almost twice as many as earlier models. But more importantly, the DC-3 was economical. For the first time, airlines could make money carrying passengers without relying heavily on mail contracts. The airplane could fly coast to coast across the United States with only 3 fuel stops, reducing travel time to just 17 hours, an incredible achievement in the 1930s. Impact on airlines: American Airlines was the first to put the DC-3 into service in 1936, and soon United, TWA, and Eastern Airlines followed. Almost overnight, the DC-3 became the backbone of commercial aviation. Passengers marveled at the comfort: wider seats, better heating and ventilation, smoother rides. Suddenly, air travel wasn't just for the adventurous elite, it was practical, reliable, and even enjoyable. By the late 1930s, more than 90% of airline passengers in the United States were flying on DC-3s. Aviation historian Arthur Perky once said, "The DC-3 was the first airliner that could make money just by carrying passengers." World War II service. Then came World War II, and the DC-3's story took on an even bigger role. The U.S. military needed a tough, reliable transport aircraft, and they turned to the DC-3. The military version was called the C-47 Skytrain, or, as the British called it, the Dakota. The C-47 became the workhorse of the Allied forces. It carried troops, supplies, and equipment to every front of the war. It towed gliders, dropped paratroopers behind enemy lines, and even evacuated the wounded. Perhaps its most famous moment came on D-Day, June 6, 1944, when hundreds of C-47s filled the skies over Normandy, dropping thousands of paratroopers into occupied France. Many veterans later said, the war couldn't have been won without the DC-3. By the end of the war, more than 10,000 C-47s had been built. Post-war aviation boom: after the war, thousands of surplus DC-3s were sold to airlines and cargo operators. This suddenly made air travel affordable worldwide. Countries from South America to Africa, from Asia to Europe, embraced the DC-3. For many places, the DC-3 was the first modern aircraft they ever saw. It could land on short, unpaved runways, operate in rugged conditions, and still carry a decent payload. In many developing regions, the DC-3 became the lifeline, connecting remote communities with the outside world. By the 1950s, the DC-3 was flying on every continent except Antarctica, and it had truly become the airplane that made the world smaller. Longevity and legacy: one of the most astonishing things about the DC-3 is its longevity. While newer jets and turboprops replaced it in mainstream airline fleets by the 1960s, many DC-3s kept flying. In fact, some are still in service today, almost 90 years after the first one took to the skies. Cargo operators in Canada's north, bush pilots in Africa, and even some military forces still rely on the DC-3. With upgraded engines and avionics, some have been modernized into so-called turboprop DC-3 as a proof of the design's lasting strength. Aviation enthusiasts often say, the only replacement for a DC-3 is another DC-3. Technical specs say for the enthusiasts. Let's take a quick look at the numbers that made the DC-3 so special. Wingspan, 95 feet. Length, 64 feet. Cruising speed, about 180 miles per hour. Range, roughly 1,500 miles. Passenger capacity, 21 to 32, depending on configuration. Engines, 2 Pratt & Whitney or 1,830 twin Wasp radial engines, each producing about 1,200 horsepower. These specs might not seem extraordinary today, but in the 1930s, they were unmatched. Cultural impact. Beyond its technical success, the DC-3 also became a cultural icon for millions of people. It was the first plane they ever flew on. It represented progress, connection, and the shrinking of the world. Writers, journalists, and even Hollywood films romanticized the DC-3 as the airplane that ushered in the golden age of flight. And in museums and air shows today, crowds still gather to see its graceful lines and hear the rumble of its engines. Closing thoughts. So, why does the Douglas DC-3 still matter? Because it wasn't just an airplane, it was a bridge from the fragile beginnings of aviation to the reliable, global air travel we know today. It served soldiers in war, passengers in peace, and communities in need. From the 1930s to the 2020s and beyond, the DC-3 has proven itself time and again. Nearly a century later, it still inspires awe, respect, and even love. As one pilot once put it, the DC-3 may be old, but it never grows obsolete. Outro narration. And that's the story of the Douglas DC-3 and the airplane that changed aviation, and maybe even the world. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history. If you ever hear the distinctive hum of twin radial engines in the distance, look up. That just might be a DC-3, still flying, still serving, still reminding us of the golden age of flight.